will regulated militia be necessary to the security of a free state? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is great to have you with us once again. As promised, on today's program, all emails all the time. We're going to get to your comments, your questions. The email address, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. You can also tweet at me at Cam Edwards on the Twitter machine. We do have some news that we're going to be covering on Bearing Arms today, including the shooting in Pensacola, Florida at Naval Air Station, Pensacola, that has left two people dead. The suspect killed as well in a shootout with law enforcement, according to authorities. That is a developing story as we are beginning this program today. Also on Monday is Bearing Arms, Cam & Company going to be taking a look at Michael Bloomberg's gun control proposals that he unveiled in Colorado on Thursday. Also on Monday's Bearing Arms, Cam & Company, Chuck Michel, California civil rights attorney, is going to be with us talking about what happens next with the Supreme Court and the Second Amendment in terms of both the New York City gun case as well as taking a look at a number of other cases. Chuck says that there are as many as 12 other Second Amendment cases that the Supreme Court is currently holding in conference right now. So the Supreme Court is just sort of taking these cases, they've set them aside, we're not rejecting them, we're not taking them, they've just sort of held them there. And there's a lot of speculation about why that is, but we'll get into that with Chuck Michel on Monday's program. Right now, let's delve into some emails, shall we? John writing in says, I saw that C-SPAN 2 on Friday night is going to be covering, quote, the Supreme Court hears oral argument for New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus New York. John says, I didn't think SCOTUS allowed cameras, so I don't know what this will be. Maybe just audio. It is likely that that is exactly what that will be, John. You're right. The Supreme Court does not allow cameras in the courtrooms, but they do allow audio recordings, and generally that audio is made available on each Friday. The week's oral arguments are posted to the Supreme Court's website. So we got the transcript of the oral arguments. You're not going to actually hear anything new, although you'll be actually hearing it for the first time. If you want to dive into the oral arguments, you should be able to listen to them this weekend from the Supreme Court's website. Rich writing in from Botetourt County, Virginia, who says, I heard you read my email on your podcast this week. Funny to hear my words read back to me and gives me a lesson on thinking harder before I send. He says, fair critique on my comments about Richmond, Northern Virginia, and the Tidewater area. He says, we're outnumbered by the leftists in those places, but there are a lot of folks on our side as well talking about the segment of the sanctuary movement in the state of Virginia. Rich says, I don't know if the Roanoke Times published my letter yet as I don't get the paper, but I thought that Lori Haas's editorial needed a local response. He says, my only critique back is that Botetourt is not pronounced Botetourt, as I pronounced it, but Botetourt, he says, like an American slang of the French pronunciation, which is where the name came from. I had trouble with it when I moved here 5 years ago, too. I got to be honest with you, Rich. When I first moved, now, I'm lucky. I mean, Farmville, Virginia, that's pretty easy. But the accents around here are a very unique accent, and it's almost Shakespearean English. And having lived in this area for like 7 years, I can't mimic the accent. I can't do the accent, except I can tell you like house is house and dog is dog, right? And I can do words, but I can't actually like string together a sentence or two with that accent. But when I first moved here, man, that accent was so thick. In some folks, I could literally not understand them. It was like they were really speaking a foreign language. And then after about 2 or 3 months of living here, all of a sudden, oh, dog is what you're saying. Okay, I had no idea what that was. But yeah, it's amazing how that works. Rich says, I'm following a Facebook group on the county's 2A sanctuary topic. A lot of comment, some positive, some angry. He says, I do think that there's a line between fired up and angry. Passion is not reason, though this topic has deep emotional roots on both sides. Rich says, as I've watched this 2A sanctuary movement unfold, I have renewed hope for America. It's been said that each generation must fight to protect liberty or lose it. And Rich says, I'd be interested in your thoughts on how this plays from here. I plan to go to Richmond on the 20th of January for Gun Owner Lobby Day to show a presence. But then what? Many of us are worried about SWAT teams knocking down our doors. But talking about that allows the other side to portray us as overreacting crazies. I think the more likely scenario is what I've seen in New York, getting these laws on the books and leaving them there for a while, and then enforcing them slowly over time. After these bills become law, there'll be a great fuss from us, but I think that the powers that be expected to die down. After all, most of us have jobs, says Rich. When I go back to New York to visit my folks, I see one or two signs in yards saying repeal the SAFE Act. The signs are fading, Rich says, and there's no hope of repeal. Maybe that's our future, or maybe we can bring back liberty. I don't know, but I do think this is as good a place as any to make a stand for the idea of America. So what do I think happens next, Rich? I'll be honest with you. I don't think anybody knows. Now, listen, first and foremost, the Second Amendment sanctuary movement, as great as it is, in Virginia, as I mentioned before, it's a defensive measure. You know, in states like Texas, which now have more than 20 Second Amendment sanctuary counties, it's a very proactive measure, right? We're sending a message before anything comes down the pike. We are not going to abide by any unconstitutional gun laws. In states like Colorado, New Mexico, Washington State, and Virginia, the Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions have definitely been much more of a defensive nature. As to the effectiveness, I think it's an open question. And I think it varies from county to county. We've seen a couple of counties in Virginia that have not only offered up resolutions, but they've actually passed emergency ordinances saying that unconstitutional gun control laws will not be followed. I suspect that a lot of these counties are going to band together in lawsuits against some of these unconstitutional gun control laws that are coming our way. But in terms of the practical effect, I think maybe the most optimistic outcome is that in the Second Amendment sanctuary counties and communities, the Commonwealth's attorney, which is our local prosecutor in Virginia, and the county sheriffs are simply not going to enforce these unconstitutional gun control laws. I know that Attorney General Mark Herring in Virginia is out with some comments. He says, this is from WRIC in Richmond. He told WRIC that these resolutions are, quote, simply expressions of opposition. And he said if any bills are passed, he expects them to be followed by all Virginians. Well, that's a dumb expectation. If every law was followed by every Virginian, we wouldn't have a need for an attorney general to begin with, right? So I think it's an idiotic statement by the attorney general, and frankly, one that I think is done because they don't want to deal with this. I've had a couple of very quiet conversations with gun control activists who are flipping out over these Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. They are very concerned about this. Herring says these resolutions have no legal effect whatsoever. It's really the gun lobby trying to scare a lot of people. When the General Assembly passes it in the upcoming session, those laws are going to be enforced and they will be followed. It's not the quote-unquote gun lobby trying to scare people. It's people actually pointing out the text of these bills. Now, there is one bill that I think has been getting a little bit of bad information. It's not a good bill, but the objections that I've heard are a little off base, and it's Senate Bill 64, and I've been meaning to write something up about this. Maybe I'll do that over the weekend, but Senate Bill 64, which has been introduced in Virginia. A lot of folks are saying, man, this is going to make it illegal to get firearms training. This is going to make it illegal to learn martial arts. It's not going to do that. As a matter of fact, Senate Bill 64 changes one minor section of current law. And the current law in Virginia already states that you cannot train somebody, whether it be, firearms training, martial arts training, whatever. You cannot train somebody or individuals in these matters for the purposes of civil unrest. Basically, if you're running a little, mini terrorist camp in the mountains of southwestern Virginia, that's illegal. If you are offering people firearms training, that's not. And that part has already been on the books. Okay, Senate Bill 64, that language is contained in Senate Bill 64, but that language is already on the books. It's been on the books for years. What is new about Senate Bill 64 is an addition that says, okay, so you've not been able to train people, but now if there are an individual or groups of individuals who are carrying firearms for the purposes of basically starting an insurrection or civil disorder, that is against the law. Again, the devil's in the details here, right? Who's to say what is a lawful assembly and what is an unlawful assembly? It's, again, likely going to be up to local law enforcement officials to decide. So could this bill prove to be problematic for things like, open carry protests or open carry walks, things like that? Theoretically, it could be. And there are some jurisdictions in the state of Virginia where that is probably more likely than others. But Senate Bill 64, which has been billed by some on our side as criminalizing firearms training or martial arts training, it does not do that. And I think, as Rich noted, there is a fine line between anger and passion. We got every right to be passionate. We have every right, frankly, to be angry that lawmakers are getting ready to infringe on our rights. However, we have to be smart. We have to be tactical in our thinking, and we have to persuade. That's a tough one. We have to be persuasive in Virginia if we are going to try to alleviate the damage that can be done by a lot of these bad bills. And make no mistake, we're going to see a lot of bad bills become bad laws. We're going to see them challenged in court. But elections have consequences. And even with these Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions and even these Second Amendment sanctuary ordinances and the number of sheriffs and Commonwealth's attorneys that are now speaking out, damage will be done to the right to keep and bear arms in the state of Virginia starting in January of 2020. It is going to happen, and gun owners have to be prepared for that. But we also have to be in it for the long haul. And I do believe that damage can be undone in the 2021 elections in the state of Virginia, when we will elect a new governor, a new attorney general. Every seat in the state assembly is going to be up. If you want to get proactive, if you want to talk about the possibility of maybe thwarting some of these bills, you're going to have to look to the Virginia State Senate, where Democrats, as of these new elections, they have a 21-19 majority. They got about a 10-seat majority in the House of Delegates. So I think they're going to be able to ram through anything they want from the House of Delegates. It's in the state Senate, I think, that we have a slight possibility of defeating some of these bills if we can target and hope to persuade some of the a couple of these rural state senators who, by the way, are this is the trouble. They're not up for re-election in 2021. The state Senate going to be up for election in 2023, so they've got 4 years. So, we're going to have to persuade a couple of these senators to do the right thing now, or face the election consequences 4 years from now. Recall elections are difficult, if not impossible, to do in the state of Virginia, so that's not really an option. Again, I think our best bet as individual gun owners is to show up at Gun Owner Lobby Day on January 20th, 2020, to send that message to lawmakers there in Richmond that gun owners are out in force, that we will not be settling and rolling over and acquiescing to these unconstitutional gun control laws, and then we are going to have to support those lawsuits that we see filed against the enforcement of every one of these gun control laws that is headed our way. And then again, at the local level, I think we're going to see varying levels of enforcement for some of these new gun control laws that are coming our way. All right, Bob in Georgia writing in about the podcast we had on Thursday with Jim Wallace from the Gun Owners Action League. Says, I listened with interest to that show about the proposed Massachusetts law requiring doctors to, quote, screen patients about guns in the home. He said, well, this may be the first attempt to do so mandated by law. It's not the first such scheme. Several years ago, the CDC launched a campaign to have doctors query patients about guns in the home, calling it a healthcare epidemic. He says, I became aware of the CDC efforts back in 2006 when I was living in Tallahassee, Florida. I rarely get sick or have medical issues, but my employer provided healthcare insurance, required me to select a primary care doctor. So I used the insurance company website to select a physician. I chose one who was an Air Force veteran from a prestigious medical school. One morning after showering, I noted I was having difficulty hearing in my left ear. It felt like when you get water. So I went to the doctor after a couple of days. He said when I was given the new patient forms to fill out, I noted that there was a questionnaire asking about whether I had guns in my home. How many, how they were stored, etc. I wrote in bold caps across the questionnaire, none of your effing business. And then the next day, I selected a new doctor. Good for you, Bob. I actually, it's funny. I've had conversations with my local doctor about guns, but he's never asked me, how many guns do you own, Cam? Where do you store them? It's more like, have you bought anything good lately? Oh, let me tell you what I just got. And we have those types of conversations. And that's, I think, a far different thing than what we're seeing in Massachusetts, where it's, again, screening for gun ownership and providing counseling for those gun owners. I think that is a completely different scenario than having a friendly conversation with your doctor, your nurse, or your dentist. I mean, again, every healthcare professional I know here in the Farmville area is a gun owner, whether it's my veterinarian or my kid's pediatrician or my dentist. Everybody's a Second Amendment supporter. So we do have those types of conversations, but I think it's probably a very different scenario when the doctor is anti-gun and the doctor is asking these questions because they disapprove of your gun ownership. Let's see, Mike writing in from South Carolina where he is running for Congress, he says. And he says, I would love to come on your program or podcast. We may do that, Mike. I might be reaching out. My concern about having candidates on programs is that if I open up to, a particular candidate, I know I've had Maj Touré on. He was running for city council in Philadelphia, but I almost feel an obligation to have every candidate for a particular race on when I do that. So if we get into, highlighting candidates in 2020, I may be reaching out to you, but I appreciate you getting involved in the race there. As Mike says, we've never been so close, he says, as we are right now, and having one of the basic rights as Americans taken away from us, the right to keep and bear arms. And I think that, I think you're right about that, Mike, honestly. And it's interesting because we have the Heller case, we have the McDonald case, we have the Supreme Court that has said, yeah, it's an individual right. And yet, when you look at some of these proposals that have been introduced, not just by Michael Bloomberg as candidate, but Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, all of them are offering up proposals that would not just regulate, but would infringe on our right to keep and bear arms. Whether it is a gun licensing scheme. And Bloomberg, when he made his gun control announcement on Thursday, compared licensing of firearms to simply registering to vote, which is baloney. And he knows it, and we know it as gun owners, because think about how the right to vote and the right to keep and bear arms is treated differently in New York City, where Michael Bloomberg was mayor. You don't have to pay hundreds of dollars to apply to vote in New York City. You have to pay hundreds of dollars to apply to exercise your right to keep arms in your home. You can't be denied for no reason whatsoever your right to vote in New York City, but you absolutely can be denied for any reason whatsoever your right to keep arms. Not even talking about bearing arms, but your right to keep arms in your home in New York City. Michael Bloomberg, as mayor and as candidate, does not treat the right to keep and bear arms as a right. And neither do Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, or any of the other Democrats who are running for president. They all want to turn that right into a privilege. Nick writing in says, Mr. Edwards, I live in Maryland, where the overwhelming vote is for liberal anti-gun politicians. Seems like we have the opposite problem from Virginia. It is not likely. Oh no, I don't think you have the opposite problem in Virginia. I think we've got that same problem now in Virginia, Nick. Nick says it's not likely that we'll flip to a pro-2A government. Is it too late for my state? What can I do in a state where I'm in a tiny minority? It's so bad that my wife and I have talked about moving south to Texas sometime in the future since they align more closely with our values. Nick, it is tough. And I mean, look, my wife and I, as I've talked about in this program before since the election, we've had a couple of conversations about moving to Texas or moving to Oklahoma where our adult kids now live. For now, we're staying and we're fighting. But, I don't begrudge anybody who has the opportunity to leave a state with restrictive gun laws or laws that infringe on the right to keep and bear arms to move to a state that actually recognizes your right. I would say if you do leave, try to kick in a couple of bucks to the state organization that you leave behind. And in Maryland, there are a couple of state organizations, but if you do end up taking off, support those who remain, because I think that that's important. But while you're there in Maryland, I think, again, it's really important to get out and send a message. The shouts of "we will not comply" that have been resonating around the country. We first heard those in Annapolis, Maryland. And there is, I think, a culture of responsible law-abiding gun owners in the state who, you're right, definitely feel like they are getting the short end of the stick right now. And the sad thing is, Nick, in Maryland, the real crime problem is in Baltimore, right? I mean, you get out to Calvert County, you head up to, Western Maryland and the Panhandle there, and it's a pretty peaceful place. Baltimore, Maryland, on the other hand, is not. And the sad thing is, since the Maryland Firearm Safety Act was signed by then Governor Martin O'Malley back in 2013, homicides in Baltimore have climbed, right? We've had 5 straight years now of 300 plus homicides. What I would like to see happen, and I don't know how successful it would be. Probably not. But what I would love to see a Republican lawmaker say in the next session in Maryland is, look, we keep going down this road. We keep passing these gun control laws. We keep restricting the rights of legal gun owners. We've sent gun companies packing to more business-friendly environments. We've seen gun stores close because of these gun control laws that we've passed. But what we haven't seen is violent crime drop and homicides drop in Baltimore, which is why these gun control laws were passed in the first place. And so we're 5 years into this failed experiment. Here's an idea. Why don't we look in another direction? Instead of assuming that it's the next gun control law that's going to make a difference, why don't we assume that it's not gun control laws that are going to make a difference at all? Again, I don't know that would sway a single Democratic voter in the Maryland legislature, but it's the honest to God truth. You guys, as long as these lawmakers continue to go down the road of trying to stop violent crime by infringing on the rights of legal gun owners, they will not be successful. And at this point, you do have to wonder, is it even about reducing violent crime at all, or is it simply about going after law-abiding gunners? Is it about trying to turn a right into a privilege? And if that's the case, and it very well may be in Maryland, I don't know that there is a persuasive argument. As much as I wish there was, Nick, I think that, you can hopefully, here is one maybe kind of sort of silver lining for you and for gun owners in Virginia and New Jersey and New York and California and Washington State and the other Massachusetts, the other Second Amendment battleground states. We do, I think, have the likelihood, not even a possibility, but the likelihood of the Supreme Court weighing in here on a Second Amendment case in the near future. If it's not New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, there's actually a challenge to a Maryland gun law. Maryland's may issue concealed carry law. That they've got a case that the court is hanging on to in conference right now. So that could be the case that the Supreme Court decides to accept. If it moots the New York City case and says, well, we're going to look around for another one, they could pluck that Maryland case up and say, all right, we're going to hear this in the spring. Start your briefings now, gentlemen. That I think is likely to be the best chance for some relief right now in some of these anti-gun states, not from the state legislature, but from the judiciary. And again, it might not happen quickly, and it might not be a perfect response, but I think it's, probably the best chance that we have at the moment. George writing in says, Cam, I love your podcast and articles on bearing arms. I've been a fan since you were on NRA TV. Thank you for that, George. Appreciate it very much. George says, I've lived my entire 64 plus years here in deep blue anti-gun Massachusetts. I was introduced to the shooting sports at age 10. It's been my passion ever since. He says, I've been licensed to carry continuously since 1976, which is a feat in Massachusetts. Yeah, it is, buddy. 1976, that was the year in Massachusetts, lawmakers put a referendum on the ballot that would have banned handguns in the entire state, and it failed. This was the same year that Washington, D.C. passed its handgun ban. This was 6 years before Chicago passed its handgun ban. We're right in sort of the peak of that ban handgun movement. And there was a ballot issue in Massachusetts in 76. Should we ban handguns? And voters in the state said no. I wonder what would happen if that vote were held today in Massachusetts. George says, we have a longtime Democrat supermajority in the legislature, and at the moment, a spineless rhino governor who will sign anything they pass, especially anything that's related to gun control. He says, I've been watching what's going on in Virginia with the sanctuary county movement, and it gives me some hope for 2A rights in general. It's good to see that they have a means under law to fight back and make their objections known, which is not the case, says George in Massachusetts. County government here is toothless. They're basically jailers. The chief of police in the 351 cities and towns have ultimate discretion as to who is granted the privilege of gun ownership. Even a firearms ID card, good for low-capacity long guns only, is issued at the discretion of the chief. And if there is an anti-gun chief in your town, your only option is to move. And any violation, he says, of Massachusetts gun law results in the lifetime revocation of all gun privileges statewide. He says, I support the NRA and our state affiliate Gun Owners Action League, but as an individual here in the state, there's little that one can do but attend hearings on new laws that you know they're going to pass anyways. I keep hoping and praying for SCOTUS decisions that will negate some of these onerous unconstitutional laws, and I cheer on good people of Virginia for resisting. Keep up the good work that you do in keeping us informed, says George in Massachusetts. Well, George, again, thank you very much. And I listen, man, I'm with you in terms of hoping for that court relief because Massachusetts gun laws, as you say, there are, when you look around at state constitutions, not only do we have the federal Second Amendment, right? Well-regulated militia, be necessary to the security of a free state, right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But in 42 state constitutions, you have guarantees of the individual right to keep and bear arms as well. In Massachusetts, you don't. In 1976, same year that George got his concealed carry license, same year that voters in Massachusetts rejected a handgun ban, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, I think it was the Supreme Judicial Court, I think it's the State Supreme Court of Massachusetts, they issued a ruling in, was it Commonwealth v. Davis, I think it was, that said there is no right to own a firearm in Massachusetts. You got it's a right of the militia, but it's not a right of the individual. And unfortunately, the Heller decision and the McDonald decision really haven't changed the way that the right to keep and bear arms is viewed in Massachusetts. And so when you see these Supreme Court justices like Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, who are saying, listen, these lower courts are just ignoring what we said in Heller McDonald. We need to hear a case because our opinion is being abused here. I think one of the things that they're talking about is what we've seen in states like Massachusetts and New Jersey, states that don't have that explicit guarantee in their state constitutions protecting the right to keep and bear arms because the laws in those states still treat gun ownership, as George says, as a privilege and not as a right. And again, that's exactly what every Democrat running for president in 2020 wants to do to the Second Amendment. They want to turn it from a right into a privilege, where, again, your local chief or whoever the issuing authority may be, in case of Michael Bloomberg's gun license, the federal government could say, yeah, we don't really think that you should be able to own a gun. We know that you haven't been convicted of a crime. You've never been adjudicated as mentally defective. You don't have any official prohibiting factors, but you don't need to have a prohibiting factor. We can determine and we can decide on our own whether or not you should be allowed to possess a firearm. Again, when it is up to the state to arbitrarily decide what law-abiding citizen gets to exercise that privilege, or to put it another way, when the average law-abiding citizen cannot keep arms, cannot bear arms, then that right is being infringed. If the average citizen, not the exceptional citizen who has proven good cause to carry a firearm or good cause to own a gun, if the average citizen, Joe Schmo, can't keep or bear arms, then their rights and our rights are being infringed. All right, let's get to a couple more emails here from Kyle, who is hoping to get a Second Amendment sanctuary resolution going into DuPage County, Illinois. He says, I know that you've talked about it in the past, but I don't recall where I can find what I may need to get this going. Any help will be great. I'll keep you posted. What I would do, Kyle, I mean, really, it's pretty easy. In Illinois, you can reach out, Effingham County a board member, David Campbell, and you should be able to find his official contact information online. But he's been helping with a lot of counties in Illinois with their own Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. Effingham County was one of the first in the state to put a Second Amendment resolution on the books. So I'd reach out to David, but also I'd reach out to your local board member, your county representative, and talk to them about this Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. Generally speaking, what the resolutions say, and they do vary from state to state and from county to county, but generally speaking, what these resolutions say is that it is not the intention of the county to spend any funds enforcing unconstitutional gun control laws. I mean, that's sort of the simple version, right? In Effingham County, you've also got, again, the sheriff and the state's attorney, which is Illinois' version of a local prosecutor, who are on board with this resolution as well. So I would reach out to David Campbell, try to reach out to some of the 60-plus counties in Illinois that have already adopted these resolutions. If you want help with the language, you want to see what that language looks like. But honestly, what it's really going to take, talking to your local supervisor, in terms of drumming up support in the local area, I would reach out to local ranges. I'd reach out to local gun stores. I would talk to, any chapter of the Well-Armed Woman that might be available in your area. Illinois State Rifle and Pistol Association, Illinois Carry. Look for those folks that again, are Second Amendment activists in your community. And that is your core group of supporters, and then expand it out from there. But please do keep us up to date on what you're doing there in Illinois, and best of luck to you, Kyle. Let's see. Also, we've got an email from William asking about the New York SAFE Act. It says, is there any movement on nullifying the so-called SAFE Act in New York? The act passed in 2013. It was working its way through the courts when Justice Scalia died. The suit was pulled from the Supreme Court action where it passed its time limit and was voided. Are there any legal actions in other states that can make it to the Supreme Court that would nullify this unconstitutional law? That's Bill in New York. First of all, Bill, I think what happened with the a couple of lawsuits that were challenging various portions of the SAFE Act, because the SAFE Act is not just one law. That's part of the problem. The SAFE Act was a package of laws, some of which Governor Cuomo has decided not to enforce, some of which the state police have said they cannot enforce. And so it's this jumble right now of legislation, some of which, all of which is on the books, some of which is actually being enforced, most of which is not. The challenge to the registration of so-called assault weapons, I think that was actually rejected by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not agree to hear that case. Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the registration was fine. And so again, in New York, what you've seen is most of the arrests and most of the prosecutions for SAFE Act violations have taken place in two boroughs of New York City, the Bronx and Brooklyn. That's where the bulk of SAFE Act arrests and prosecutions are occurring. Not in upstate New York, not in Buffalo or Erie County or Albany, but two boroughs of the Big Apple. And the vast majority of charges that are brought in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, and the smattering of cases that are brought across the rest of the state, deal with one particular aspect of SAFE Act law. And that was the change that made it a felony offense to possess a firearm without a license, whereas before it was a misdemeanor. That's been the big change. Are there legal actions that could impact the SAFE Act in New York? Sure. A Supreme Court ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association could impact some of these provisions. I suspect, though, that the provision that makes it a felony to carry a firearm without a license would probably be upheld by the court. Although, again, I'm not an attorney, but from my line of thinking, we now have 15 states that are constitutional or permitless carry. You've got 8 states, and New York's one of them, that is still, quote unquote, may issue, where, you can be denied that right to carry for any reason or no reason whatsoever. I think that if we got a good ruling, let's say in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus New York City, or we got a good ruling in Rogers versus Grewal, which is a case that the court's hanging on to, has not agreed to hear yet, but the court's keeping it in conference, deals with New Jersey's carry laws, then that could absolutely undo some of the, or potentially undo some of the damage done by the SAFE Act. But honestly, there are so many provisions of the SAFE Act that I believe should be repealed because they've been abject failures. The ban on magazines over 7 rounds, that is virtually unenforceable. And you've got DAs in, I think the DA in Erie County says we're not going to be trying to enforce that aspect of the law. New York State Police were required to set up a system by which every ammunition purchase in the state of New York would go through a background check. And the New York State Police threw up their hands and said, we can't. That was supposed to go into effect like 2 years ago. And they just said, well, we can't. And they never took that aspect of the law off the books. It's still there. It's just not being enforced. The requirement that New Yorkers register their quote unquote assault weapons. Compliance estimated as of a couple of years ago anyway at like 5%. The requirement that every handgun owner in New York State re-register their handguns. Last I saw, estimates were anywhere from 75 to 100,000 New Yorkers had not complied with that law. And, theoretically, Governor Cuomo could say, all right, well, let's New York State Police go look at these old registrations. Let's see what these addresses are. Let's start going around and hauling these gun owners in. But they're not doing that. And instead of actually ensuring that either the SAFE Act is workable or getting rid of it, they're leaving these bad laws on the books and they're just adding to them, unfortunately, Bill. And I suspect that that's going to remain the case in New York State. But again, yes, I think that the Supreme Court could offer New Yorkers some relief. Clearly, gun control advocates are terrified about that possibility, but I do think that they could offer the residents of New York some relief here. Craig writing in with a email titled FOID Card Follies out of Illinois. Just another example, he says, of making honest folk jump through hoops while not delivering consequences to violators. That's from a Illinois news channel, News Channel 20. Thousands of revoked FOID cards unaccounted for. Yeah, I know. Again, the FOID card issue in Illinois is such a mess right now. And there are 2 cases that are up before the Illinois State Supreme Court dealing with the FOID card issue, seeking to hold the FOID card unconstitutional. I think that one case probably has a better chance than others. There was a woman who was arrested for having basically a .22 rifle in her home. She was eligible for a FOID card. There was no prohibiting factor or anything like that. She just didn't have one. And so she was arrested for having a firearm that she was otherwise legally allowed to own. And in every state that doesn't require a firearms ID card, she would be fine to own this rifle. But in Illinois, she's now facing charges because she didn't have her FOID card. And that case has gone up to the Illinois State Supreme Court. And that one could be, a case that strikes down the state's FOID card requirements. Brian writing in with a question about Virginia. He says, I've been wondering about your thoughts regarding the elected officials who took the oath of office and then don't comply with the oath. Isn't it perjury to take an oath and then break that oath, just as anyone in the military can be disciplined if they break the oath that they took when they enlisted? Virginia oath of office says, quote, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge all the duties incumbent upon me as whatever office I'm in, according to the best of my ability, so help me God. And then Brian cites Article 1, Section 13 of the Virginia Bill of Rights, that it will regulate a militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms as the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. Therefore, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That standing armies in time of peace should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Brian says, it seems to me that any gun-grabbing measures not only violate the Virginia Constitution and the U.S. Bill of Rights, but also perjury of oath of office and an offense of impeachable magnitude with possible legal ramifications. What are your thoughts on this? My thoughts, Brian, is that it's first of all, for any charges to be brought in a legal setting here against politicians violating their constitutional oath of office, you would have to show that they violated their oath of office and did not defend the Constitution. So before any of that would happen, you'd have to have any of these. Let's say Senate Bill 16 passes in Virginia. That's the bill that would ban not only the sale, the transfer, the manufacture, but the possession of so-called assault weapons. So let's say that passes, because it very well may, signed into law by Governor Ralph Northam, and somebody decides, I'm going to sue Ralph Northam. Or we can just say, let's say maybe that there's a Commonwealth's attorney out there that says, hey, I'm going to bring charges against Ralph Northam for violating his oath of office. In order for that to proceed, first of all, you'd have to have a court ruling that Senate Bill 16 was in fact unconstitutional. You and I could think that it's unconstitutional. Our county sheriff might say it's unconstitutional. But until the Supreme Court weighs in and says, hey, this is unconstitutional, it's going to be really difficult to prosecute somebody for violating their oath of office. Secondly, note the wiggle room in that oath of office, right? I solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, that I will faithfully and impartially discharge all the duties incumbent upon me according to the best of my ability. So what does that mean? According to the best of my ability. Let's say, again, Ralph Northam gets charged with violating his oath of office. The defense would simply be, hey, look, I'm exercising my duties to the best of my ability. I believe this was a constitutional law. Even let's say the Supreme Court rules it's unconstitutional. Northam can say, I believe that it was constitutional at the time. I had guidance from my attorney general that this was constitutional. In other words, Brian, it's really damn difficult to prosecute somebody for violating their oath of office. It's much easier to toss them out on the rear ends during the next election. So I would not be looking or anticipating any charges brought against officials for violating their oath of office if they pass these gun control laws in the state of Virginia. I just don't think that that's going to happen. All right, we'll get to one more email here. And I'll be honest with you, Roy, I don't have a great answer for you, man. Roy says, how about comparing guns to the weapons of mass destruction that are abortion tools? He says, if Democrats care about killings, why aren't they making a big racket over abortion and partial birth abortion weapons? Gun laws, he says, support lying tyrants like Democrats who want to control the people so they can't fight against Democrat tyranny. Conservatives need to get this on the news every time guns are brought up. Roy, I suppose that you could try to make that argument. I just don't think it's going to be very persuasive among Democrats. I think, frankly, a better argument to use among Democrats if you're trying to persuade them is, look, you say that a woman has a right to choose, my body, my business. Well, why is that the case when it comes to an abortion, but not the case when it comes to self-defense? Why is it that women and American citizens are empowered to make these decisions for what best suits their own needs, and yet when it comes to making the decisions to best protect themselves and their families, Democrats want to deny them that choice. I think that as gun owners, as much as possible, we need to keep our arguments focused on our issue. And, look, you can certainly, with the Second Amendment sanctuary movement, for instance, you can certainly talk about the sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants that Democrats are pushing around the country. And, if it's okay for them to do that, why can't we have our Second Amendment sanctuaries? And you can make that argument, but you could also make an even more narrowly tailored argument about Second Amendment sanctuaries and just keep to the gun control issue. Because not only are Democrats passing sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants, Democrats and anti-gun politicians are passing local laws in violation of state firearms preemption laws all around the country, right? Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto's done it. Billings, Montana had a local universal background check bill that got rejected by the Montana State Supreme Court. Got a couple of court challenges out in Washington State right now. There's a big push among gun control activists to try to undo these firearm preemption laws at the state level by passing their own local ordinances in violation of state law. So to me, you don't even need to get into the sanctuary city argument. If gun control activists are right now passing local laws in violation of state law, hoping to change the state law, how is that any different than local communities or counties passing resolutions, not even laws, passing resolutions saying we will not enforce unconstitutional gun control measures? Again, your mileage might vary, but I just find that when gun owners stick to the single issue and certainly make that single issue the thrust of the argument, I think it serves us better. Now, that argument that you raised, maybe that's an argument against abortion. But I don't know how effective a pro-Second Amendment argument might be, Roy. Anyway, I do appreciate each and every one of you for emailing. The email address is cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. Feel free to drop me a line anytime. I think we might make this our Friday feature, at least for the next couple of weeks, depending on the volume of emails that we get here. But in the meantime, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thanks so much for joining us on the program today. We'll be back Monday with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. As I mentioned, we'll talk more about Michael Bloomberg's gun control agenda, candidate Bloomberg's gun control agenda. Chuck Michel will join us, Second Amendment attorney, president of the California Rifle and Pistol Association. Don't forget, you can subscribe to Bearing Arms Cam & Company as a podcast at Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, townhall.com podcasts, and we will see you on Monday. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great weekend.